So welcome to episode 3 of Let's Talk CIWEM, the podcast series from CIWEM, which keeps you right up to date with current issues in the world of water and environmental management, talks to the key figures across our industry, and takes a deep dive into some of the biggest challenges and topics we're all facing at the moment. We're grateful to our series sponsor, Yorkshire Water, for helping us share these conversations and bring this podcast idea to life. I'm Niki Roach. I'm the president of CIWEM, and the theme of my presidency is Everything is Connected. As we cover these seemingly independent topics in our podcast series, we're already hearing some fascinating links being created, and I really hope that this series of podcasts helps us all explore the opportunities that thinking in a more connected way can create. And I'm sure today's topic, pride, will do just that. Each episode, joining me to give opinions and expert analysis is a guest co-host. And today, to explore the theme of LGBTQ+ inclusion, I'm delighted to be joined by Lila Thompson, the CEO of British Water. Welcome, Lila.
Thank you, Niki. It's great to be here today.
Let me introduce Lila to you a little bit more. So Lila's the Chief Executive of British Water, a dynamic trade association with a really varied membership, covering all sectors of the water and wastewater industry. It includes manufacturers, suppliers of technologies and services, all the way through to contractors, consultants and water companies. And Lila formerly was responsible for British Water's international services. So she's worked in a really wide range of international markets, a phenomenal list: Saudi, Libya, Morocco, Russia, Bulgaria, China, India, to name but a few, helping companies grow their businesses overseas. And as my co-host for today, Lila and I, we're going to listen to our guest interview together in a moment, and then we'll discuss her reflections in the context of her experience as CEO of British Water and her career to date. So our guest interview in this episode takes us to Australia, and in a few minutes we'll hear from Jacquie and Brendan Moore from Yarra Valley Water in Melbourne. I spoke to them a couple of days ago, and I'm really delighted that you're co-hosting this episode with me, Lila, because I think the interview we're about to listen to is such an engaging one. I'm particularly looking forward to unpicking some of the key themes with you, and for me in particular, the importance of feeling safe at work.
To me, it was impossible that I would ever bring up being gay. It was not a safe environment, both from at times with some people in the broader industry, physically, not feeling safe, but career-wise. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I would not have thought it possible to have the career that I love and be honest with people at work.
So, Lila, today's topic of LGBTQ+ inclusion is one that I'm really looking forward to discussing with you, as I don't think it's a conversation that I've been part of particularly at any point during my career. I'm definitely on a steep learning curve with the topic, and definitely somewhere near the beginning of my journey to find out how to be a better ally to the LGBTQ+ community, and particularly in the water sector. What's your experience of working with this as a topic so far?
So, Niki, my experience is quite similar to yours. It's not been something that has been discussed widely, or from my perspective, been discussed widely in the water sector, not in the meetings anyway that I've attended or the conferences. This is something that needs to be discussed within the sort of wider D&I discussions. Obviously, there's been a lot of focus on the BAMI community with the Black Lives Matter movement, more sort of discussion around disabilities. But I think in terms of the LGBTQ+ community, we could do a lot more than what we're currently doing.
Yeah, and I'm really interested to make sure that we focus on this as a specific topic, but also not lose sight of the learning that can be applied more broadly to an inclusion lens, I think.
Yeah, just to add to that, we started as British Water a Women in Water or Women on Water campaign. It was Women in Water at the start in 2018. And then recently at a board meeting, we agreed that we needed to widen that scope and bring that within a wider D&I initiative, and that's what we're discussing. So we will be incorporating the LGBTQ+ community and addressing their concerns and how we can best support them within the water industry.
Let's get stuck in. Time for this episode's big interview. So I first heard Jacquie and Brendan speak at the Northumbrian Water Innovation Festival in 2020, and they talked about Pride in Water, which was an initiative that I wanted to find out more about and find out where it's headed. So I'm delighted to welcome our two wonderful guests all the way from Australia, Jacquie and Brendan Moore, who both work for Yarra Valley Water in Melbourne. Jacquie's a senior graphic designer and Brendan's a senior project manager. So welcome, guys.
Yeah, good day.
Thanks, Niki.
I am so pleased you said good day, Brendan. That couldn't be more. Just in case you weren't sure, guys, where Brendan and Jacquie are in the world. It's amazing. You are both so welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. To begin with, what is Pride in Water?
Yeah, so look, Pride in Water is an opportunity for us to really want to affect change in the water industry across Australia. Kind of born from the experience that Jacquie and I have had specifically at Yarra Valley Water, creating an LGBTIQ plus inclusive workspace to make sure that, you know, no matter where you work in the water industry, you feel as safe and included and valued as you do anywhere else, regardless of which organisation or where specifically in Australia you may find yourself.
Yarra Valley Water, for people that don't know, is kind of in the outer eastern suburbs of Melbourne. And when we first started doing LGBTIQ inclusion work out there, it's quite challenging work. The water industry is traditionally quite conservative. We were really lucky at Yarra Valley Water. We had a lot of support from the diversity and inclusion team. They understood that they needed to see change, but for it to come from people with lived experience of being LGBTIQ, they knew that it was more likely to be successful and have a voice rather than doing the regular D&I kind of work where you're kind of trying to change policy, but it's really hard to bring people on board with that change.
Do you mind if I address my elephant that's in the room? Might not be anybody else's, but, you know...
Don't call me that, Nikki. Oh, wow.
I didn't like to say anything, but so the acronym LGBTQ+, which is what I would use here in the UK, and Jacquie, you use
LGBTIQ, and even in Australia, the acronym is changing a little bit more. The organisations are starting to use LGBTIQA+. So LGBTIQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and gender diverse, intersex, and queer, and then we're also, depending on the organisation's focus, also including asexual. And the plus goes beyond that. The community is very diverse as well, so you can be a number of those letters, I guess. In Australia, there's a big conversation around including the intersex community. The acronym just changes depending on what your organisation's focus is. So perhaps in the UK, the I isn't included as much because the conversation's not as broad. We include the Q because a lot of newer generations or younger generations identify as queer. I identify as queer, whereas older people don't feel comfortable using the term queer because of the stigma that comes with it. And we've really tried to reclaim that word and be proudly queer.
Thank you. And that's so helpful. It's useful because you want to get it right.
It's not even about getting it right. It's about giving it a go as well, or asking questions as well.
Yeah. It's dynamic both in the sense that language is always dynamic, but then also it is a community and the community is very dynamic. That's why we've seen that evolution, especially around the acronym, because we have gotten stronger in the ability to allow others in the community and their voices to be heard as well.
Yeah. I guess it's shifting as we become prouder of who we are, and that homophobia and the transphobia is really changing, and we can start to talk more openly about our bodies, and it's becoming more broader.
Especially these younger kids that are coming through with so much more confidence. This is what feeling old is, Nikki. This is
I know.
realising that there's this generation coming after you that just expects so much more and have so much more confidence, which is great to see.
But I think though, Brendan, that's a really good lead in though, because I think that the work that we are doing is about paving that path, and I really think about my own kids, and we're a rainbow family. So we're a family of two mums and a step-parent that is non-binary or gender diverse, and transgender is how they identify. And I think about my kids and them going into the world of going to school and university and proudly talking about their family, and knowing that at the moment they probably wouldn't safely go into a workplace and talk about that openly. And that's a lot of the kind of the work that we're doing, is creating safe pathways.
Where did the motivation come for you guys individually to do this? What's the driving force behind this for you on a personal level? Because it takes a lot of effort to have the courage to start to lead something, I think, in any organisation.
I really like hearing Brendan's story. I'll let him go first, because I feel like it really captures a lot of that water industry sense as well. I
started my career in the water industry in operations. Being a chemical engineer, I was really drawn to ops. So the first opportunity I had was to go to this, wasn't country, it was just non-metropolitan to start with, environments. And I quickly found myself surrounded by, a very welcoming, but a very blue collar work environment. To me, it was impossible that I would ever bring up being gay at work or talk about my sexuality at all, because it just was not a safe environment, both from at times with some people in the broader industry, not even just those that you work with, but when you're dealing with contractors, etc. Physically, not feeling safe, but career-wise, I love my job. I love what I do. I love the industry that we're in. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, I would not have thought it possible to have the career that I love and be honest with people at work about my sexuality and how I identify. And as my career went on, I got less urban and more rural, and actually ended up in the middle of regional South Australia. And the biggest awakening for me in terms of how much I was sacrificing in my personal life was, literally becoming the only gay in the village. Turning on Grindr. It's an app that helps you find other same-sex attracted men. And the closest, when I turned on this app where I was living, was like 50 plus kilometers away. And that was as the crow flies across a bay. So it was even further. That really makes you feel aware of just how isolated you are. And this is not a place where I can be who I am. This is a place where I am an engineer first. And, everything else has to kind of fall by the wayside. And it wasn't until I started at Yarra Valley Water, and Yarra Valley Water even kind of uttered this thought process that they had about maybe looking into LGBTIQ plus inclusion, that I really had to give myself a kick up the arse and just say, no, this is something I have to put myself forward for. This is something I have to get involved with. But I was scared, Niki. It was a huge fear to overcome to even step forward. And when I did, the amount of people that were like, why? Why would you do that? Why are you working in that space? Why would you want to be part of that group? And then, just having to really out myself at work, and then en masse just have that conversation over and over again anytime anyone realized I was working in this group. The reason I did it is because it was really important to me that someone else coming into the industry, a fresh young grad, I didn't want them to have to go through that long journey like I had. I wanted them to instantly feel welcome and included and safe. And so that was really the motivating factor for me.
It's wonderful to hear your stories, and it's wonderful to hear the confidence that has grown from them, really. I'd never had to think about not feeling safe at work. It never occurred to me that would be the way that somebody else might feel. And I'm embarrassed to say that, but it's the truth. And so I guess I'm really therefore interested in what you've then started to do to move a whole organisation, and then we'll find out to start to shift a whole country. Give me a sense of what that's looked like in practice, really, and the kind of steps that you've taken within Yarra that you guys have been so instrumental in leading.
When we first started doing the LGBTIQ inclusion work, it was around the conversation around marriage equality that was happening here in Australia. What that meant is that there was quite an anxious and heightened conversation around LGBTI people, but it also meant that it shifted because previously we never really talked about LGBTIQ people. My experience at Yarra was that when I started there as a graphic designer, I wasn't out about who I was. And as that conversation around marriage equality was happening, I knew that I needed to be much more obvious about who I was. And, big steps, like for me, was wearing a rainbow lanyard. And I still remember that day of just like, oh my God, like if I could do that, then other people will see that there's an LGBTIQ person here, and they're willing to visibly show. And I think that what we saw more broadly is that kind of the organisation really visibly showing support and allowing us to have a voice and talk about what it means to be LGBTIQ. And so some key things that Yarra did, and it was through the work of, we had a working group that was kind of a bit like a organisation directed Pride Network. We celebrate Wear It Purple Day and Ida Hobbit, which would be, they're quite universal days, and they really look at that experience, particularly of young people, and the high rates of suicide within the community and mental health issues. And by being able to bring these things up, it really made people think about not just the LGBTIQ people that are within our workplaces, but in their broader community. So we found that once we started to visibly show that support, that people would come forward and start talking about their daughter that has just come out as being a lesbian or bisexual. It's not just about creating a safe place for individuals that identify as LGBTIQ. It's allies, and it's people that are thinking more broadly about their family and talking openly about how much their actual community is diverse, and being able to bring that to work as well. Because we were able to drive it from our positions, and then leadership could come on board and feel more confident in that space of understanding language and why the work was so important.
We're really grateful to our sponsor Yorkshire Water for making it possible to bring you this podcast series. If your organisation would like to find out more about sponsoring future episodes or series of Let's Talk WEM, just go to letstalkwem.ciwem.org to get all the information you need. It would be really helpful actually so we've started to touch on some of the specifics. You can tell I've spent my time in ops as well, can't you, Brendan? I'm always like, so what did you do? Like, what did you actually do? What are the things? How do I implement that? Yeah. You touched on leadership a little bit there, Jacquie, and you also touched on ensuring that you've kind of got authentic voices, and voices not just within a classic HR or D&I community, but actually people within the LGBTIQ community. I'd be really interested to know that leadership change. How did that work? How did you help change that kind of culture and get leaders on board with it?
What really makes a big difference is storytelling and creating a space where people can talk about their lived experience and themselves. And when Brendan and I started doing this work, we just thought that, particularly for Pride in Water, that no one would really care and we'd just do this work on the side. And what we found though is that the entire water industry was like, we need to see this change happening. We know that we don't understand LGBTIQ inclusion work, but we are so glad that you have started talking about this. And that really drove that leadership change, because they understood that they needed to see the conversation happening. We were quite shocked at how quickly the water industry wanted to get on board and support this work. And what we've always said is that we're not experts in it, and nobody is an expert, but we can all be allies, and we need to stop just assuming that there's no LGBTIQ people in our water authorities or in our communities, because we do exist, and we need to create a space where those people can come forward and perhaps even they might be at an early part of understanding that about themselves, but we can create that space for them.
It wasn't an overnight adaptation for Jacquie, and I think we can both agree that at times there was a bit of head banging against walls, Niki. It's still a bit taboo. It still seems like a radical thing to talk about, to talk about anything with the word sex in it, let alone, gender identities as well. And people having this very X-rated view of what we were going to talk about when really it has nothing to do with sex. It's all about identity and how people are safe and welcome to be who they are at work. It took a lot of time, I think, to get people to feel comfortable to even use the acronym, to talk about the topic. Jacquie and I aren't the only ones that talk about our sexuality or our gender identity at work. Everybody does it. Niki, you've brought it up several times in the conversation we've had today. Previous to recording, you've talked about your husband, you've talked about your kids, people put photos up, it's very common to come to work and be like, oh, I got engaged, or, my partner and I we're going to get married later in the year. All of those things are very visible demonstrations and expressions of our gender and sexual identity. And so I think when we kind of started to break that down for people, that it wasn't a taboo subject, we all talk about this and we just want to be part of the conversation, that really gave leaders at Yarra Valley Water an opportunity to support what we were doing and to amplify our voices rather than trying to speak for us or have a HR department speak for us. It enabled other water companies to be like, oh, finally, someone's talked about this thing that we've kind of just ignored because we didn't feel comfortable, we didn't know how to talk about this radical thing. So I think that's contributed to why we've seen a tsunami of support, to use a water pun.
I think also, definitely for people that are thinking about doing this work, get an exec sponsor. Get somebody to champion the work that you're doing, because you're going to make a lot more change and have an amplified voice if you have someone that is in leadership that's going to create that space for you and kind of show you the path. I think that what's really difficult for an LGBTIQ person, that we are so used to being pushed to the side, and it's really hard to step forward and take up that space and say that your voice is valid and raise those issues around being perhaps transgender, or like being lesbian or being gay, or like, you know, talking about your family openly. But I think that if we have leadership that steps forward and says, I want to be the one that mentors you or creates that space, it's a massive difference. And I think that if you're in that position, that definitely you should be thinking about how you can start creating those opportunities, and not just for the LGBTIQ community. It's also thinking about that space of Black Lives Matter and inclusion for women within workplaces as well.
Something that I was reflecting on that Brendan made me think about was choosing to disclose or choosing not to disclose, and the impact that COVID has had on that for a lot of people, not so much in sort of frontline ops roles, but, you know, we're sat here on Zoom this evening. Brendan and Jacquie have got a beautiful view of my spare bedroom. I'm letting you into my house and I'm totally cool with that. But that's quite a big deal, actually, isn't it? And I hadn't even really thought about. But if you're in a position where you're not ready to be who you really are at work, then actually suddenly work is in your space rather than the other way around. And I would imagine that for many people over the last 9 months, actually, it's just added a layer of complexity if they don't feel like they work somewhere where it's safe to be themselves, really. So many things I just didn't think about. What I'm realising is how little I know about so much stuff. So if nothing else, I'm learning. Thank you, guys. Let's start to wrap up now with just a bit of a sense of what is next. What's the ambition and how are you getting on with that at the moment? Where are you?
I think one of the great things about Pride in Water is that it's just really taken off itself. We started off wanting to be Victoria focused, and what we realised is that the water industry in Australia wanted to come on board and support the work that we're doing. So I think going into 2021, we're really looking at how do we look more broadly at the Australian water industry, and we need to create a network that speaks to everybody's experience, whether or not you're in Perth on the other side of Australia or in regional Queensland, because the water industry is everywhere.
What would be the one thing that you would offer as a takeaway from your experience so far with Pride in Water?
I'd say be brave and understand that organisations need diversity. We can talk about inclusion, but it's actually the diversity and inclusion, that it's not about fitting in, it's about actually valuing diversity within our workplaces and the different ways that we approach work. That's what the future needs.
Once you have that courage and that bravery, be proud. I'm much more open now about being gay and being very proud of the fact that I'm part of a great community like the LGBTIQ plus community. You don't want that to define you. You don't want that to be the thing that people go, oh, he's the gay guy or the queer person or whatever. But that visibility is so important, and that visibility and that proudness evokes conversation, and that's how we make the change, and that's how we progress things forward. Really breaking down that taboo that LGBTIQ plus is not a bad word. It's a hard acronym to say, but it's not a bad word. Niki, you were talking about that window into the personal life. That's the whole reason I've got a pride flag there, to really mark my territory and to let people know that you're coming into my space, and this is where I live, and you're talking to me, and this is part of who I am.
Courage and pride. What a lovely sentiment to end on. Thank you, guys. All that leaves me to say is just a ginormous thank you, Brendan, Jacquie. It was lovely to meet you both.
Thank you. Thanks, Niki.
Okay, so Lila, what did you think listening to that interview?
It was actually quite moving, I think, listening to that. The areas that they raised and the experiences that they've had and the stories that they were talking about in terms of their own experiences showed you that actually there are still some serious issues within companies and within workplaces that we really do need to address to make sure that people do feel included, that people do feel valued, that people do feel safe as well, because not feeling safe at work is pretty serious. And we do need to create these safe spaces where people feel that they can talk about their experiences, talk about how they might wish to get support that they need, and also just to be able to be themselves in the workplace, whatever that might be. Particularly because I read a report some years ago that actually there's hardly anybody who is their authentic self in the workplace. And I think there probably needs to be a bit of discussion as to around what does that authentic self look like and what does that actually mean? Because we all have to adapt to our surroundings, whether it's with family, friends, the workplace, whatever that means. But I think there needs to be a certain amount of comfort within ourselves when we go into these different environments so that we can operate at our fullest potential.
The point that Brendan raised around COVID and for those people that are working from home and the impact that, bringing work into your home has really stuck with me, actually. And that point around what do you share of your world and how much do you want to share and what are you now being forced to share? Because actually bringing your full self to work is much more prevalent now, because for a lot of people, if you've got caring responsibilities, they're sometimes with you at work all the time, if you're homeschooling, whatever it might look like. So it's kind of forcing the issue, I think, isn't it, a little bit more in some respects now?
It is. And I think it's forcing the issue in a positive way. I mean, I heard, for example, my husband on a call talking to somebody about some accounts, and they had their baby in the background constantly crying. And these are things that you just wouldn't hear, but it made me compassionate. I wasn't even involved in the conversation, but I heard my husband saying, look, let me just leave you because your child obviously needs your attention. And I think it's hopefully going to make us a bit more compassionate towards our colleagues and understanding. And also, in a way, it's kind of been a leveller to a certain extent, because I kind of find that wearing suits and the formal sort of work uniform creates a bit of distance as well as the job title. But if that's stripped away because you know that somebody's just maybe put their shirt on and they've got pajama bottoms and a fairy pair of slippers.
Are you giving us an insight into your life today, Lila?
Actually, no, I've just fully, I always just fully every day, but I always, sometimes on my meetings when I meet chairmen or CEOs, I think, I wonder what kind of slippers they're wearing today. But I think that it's made people much more approachable, much more open, and in some ways transparent. But I think that it's made it positive, and I hope that people will use this time to really sort of connect in a more sort of deeper way with their colleagues, to really sort of get to know them better and understand maybe some of the areas in which maybe they would like support that they haven't had it in the past.
One thing I'm thinking about is the difference between visible and invisible diversity. But there will be people within our sector who are absolutely within the LGBTQ plus community, but just don't identify at work like that, don't feel like they want to, don't feel like, as you said, they feel safe to. And so I guess it's an interesting challenge, isn't it? Because we don't necessarily know what the diversity gap is, if that makes sense.
That's right. Yeah. No, it's true. And I think that's a factor when you're trying to make a change, because it often starts with data. You want to collect data to see what proportion of staff are BAMI. For example, I know somebody from a BAMI background who lies and says that they're white because they purposely just don't want to live under the cloud of thinking, because I'm BAMI, I have to have these sort of experiences. So you can't always go with the data. And also, as we've just discussed, people don't always feel safe to identify themselves as something, because that could lead to discrimination. Being diverse is intrinsic to being human. I think we all are diverse by nature, and nobody is the same, although we can tend to have collective experiences. So, for example, most of us will know what it's like to lose a loved one or whatever that might be. But I think it's the collective experiences that we can recognise more than the fact that we are different in ways that people might not particularly understand. If people can find an ally or somebody that they can confide in, somebody that they can trust in the workplace, even if it's one person or even if it's somebody outside of their company but in the sector, then a mentor or somebody, then I think that would be of value, because it's not good to feel isolated in the workplace. Even if you don't want to go for promotion, but you want to be able to enjoy your work experience, you do need to have people alongside you who you can talk to about your day, talk to about, frustrations, whatever that might be, joyful experiences that you've had, things that you've done really well, things that you've achieved. And I think it's a shame if you can only do that outside of the workplace, because you've only got your friends and family to confide in.
What do we need to do as a sector then? If we're talking about how do we, individually people can think about finding allies, but what are your thoughts about, so with your British Water hat on, or maybe just the sector more generally, in terms of LGBTQ+, should we be doing more?
Yeah, I think we definitely should be doing more. And I think the starting place is the safe space. I think we need to have the conversations. And I think those safe spaces also have to make sure that the people who don't know and don't understand that particular community can also feel free to ask questions without the fear of saying the wrong thing and potentially feeling themselves ostracised because they might be seen to be clueless or insensitive or whatever that might be. I think the really important thing about safe spaces is that they're also environments to learn and understand. Talking from my experience of being within the Black and ethnic minority community, I've tended to use my career and my entire life educating people where I can about what it's like being Black, about what it's like being Black and travelling overseas internationally on holiday or on business, the sorts of things that you experience, the sorts of things you have to think about. And that's been a real eye-opener for people. So I know some people don't want to do that, but that's just me. That's just the way I am. That's the sort of thing that I've done. I think if you just use these safe spaces that people can share and talk about things, then I think that's a start. And then at least then people will feel embraced and valued and then able to hopefully flourish in their careers and in their roles.
So how do we do that? How do we create those safe spaces? What do you think that looks like in practice? In your experience, when if you've done that for things like Women on Water, I guess, is one example. What does good look like?
I think we just need to create meetings and just say, look, this meeting is about the LGBTQ plus community, and we're going to have an open conversation about what that looks like in the workplace. And if you just have a broad meeting like that, then you invite your senior leadership team, you invite your staff, you do initiatives, then people will know that it's an area that the company's focusing on. People might then hopefully feel willing to join those meetings and share. If not, listen. You can create sort of portals on your company website. You can do all kinds of initiatives. And even if people don't speak within those meetings and events that you organise, then they'll tend to connect outside of it anyway. So they'll find people who they can connect with and talk to, so they're not isolated. It's making sure that the things that you're doing across the board in your company is inclusive, and just checking your data, as much data as obviously you can gather, but checking your data to see, if you really are being as inclusive as you think you are. I mean, we're all on a D&I journey anyway. I mean, I have to say for our organisation, we're on a D&I journey ourselves for representation in the workforce. And diversity comes in ways that we don't always necessarily recognise. I mean, the other day I was speaking to another lady in another organisation, and she was talking about the fact that what they're trying to do is offer people roles who have terminal illnesses, because there are people with terminal illnesses who want to work, but they can't find a job because people don't want to employ them. And that really moved me. And I said, well, I'd love to help. So there's so many different spectrums within the D&I that some of us haven't even thought about yet, where we can do something. So I think it's also just being open to new areas where we can support people, especially as we're going to need, I think the figure is around just under 30,000 vacancies are going to be cropping up within the UK water sector within the next 10 years. And we really do need to make the sector more attractive. We are underrepresented in so many different ways.
It's a sector that is dealing with some of the biggest challenges that we've got, isn't it? It's a sector that's tackling climate change, that's tackling water scarcity. You want absolutely really passionate individuals to come and join. And I love Brendan's comments around the younger generation expect. And I think that's absolutely right. Expect that it will be inclusive, that the default position should be that it will be safe. And I think it's our job to make sure that we create the conditions to enable that, don't we?
But I think at the same time, though, we still need to have a level of kindness, acknowledging that people are on a journey to doing things, to getting things right. I mean, there's nobody on the planet who hasn't hurt somebody somewhere along the line through something that they've said, or something that they've done which they have no idea about, which has caused great offence. And I think we need to be open to having those conversations to say, look, I'm really sorry that I said this, if you know that you've done something wrong or you said something that's hurtful. And then you can have those sort of conversations and address those. And I think we have to create those spaces for those honest discussions where people can grow through these sorts of conversations.
Yeah. Lila, what a lovely conversation. All it leaves me to say is a huge thank you to our guests today, Brendan and Jacquie, and my wonderful co-host, Lila Thompson.
Oh, thank you.
And that's it, everyone. Stay safe, and I will see you next time.
Let's Talk WEM is produced by Bwlb. Bwlb Bwlb. The best ideas, the strongest content.